Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast. Hey there, Karma Crew. I am so excited to finally bring out what I have been archiving for probably at least 2 months, probably 3 months, with this interview that I'm bringing to you today. It is part 1 of 2 because Cathryn and I talked for 2 hours, and it was just the most stimulating conversation that I think I have had on the podcast so far. Cathryn Vogeley wrote a book called I Need to Tell You. And boy, does she tell you. She is a birth mother, and before any adoptees that are listening to this podcast want to turn off the podcast, I'm telling you, don't do it. Do not turn off this podcast. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I have been wanting and dreading at the same time to have a birth mother on the show, on the podcast, because I want to show all sides of the adoption story. And it was so difficult finding someone. And I opened my email one day and there was Cathryn Vogeley, and she wanted to come on the podcast. And I said, well, there it is. And here we go. So I did. And I have to tell you, she changed my view in so many different ways. And it's exactly what I'm trying to do with this podcast, is put a face and a life and a story, someone's real life story, put that out there into the world so that people can see this is a real story. This is what actually happens to birth mothers, to adoptees, to adoptive parents, to foster children. This is what happens. And as an adoptee that has had 2 rejections, a relinquishment and a second rejection, she really changed my heart. And I have some compassion now for what birth mothers go through and what my birth mother might have gone through. And it makes me just want to sit down and ask her some questions now. This adoption thing goes so much deeper than just adoptees. So I encourage you, even if it's difficult and you just hear the word birth mother and you're like, nope, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't listen to this. I can't. I think you should try. I really think you should try. And if nothing else, go to an audiobook, go to Amazon, order the book. It's kind of like The Primal Wound for me. The first time I read it, it made me mad. It triggered me. I threw it in the garbage, threw it away. But that was my opportunity for my why. To dig deeper. Why is this triggering me? And so I encourage that for you, because that's where the growth is. The growth is where you are uncomfortable. So ask yourself why that word birth mother triggers you. And just because you might be mad at your birth mother doesn't mean that you can't have some compassion as well for what she went through. It doesn't mean what she did was right. You are not forgiving her by giving her some compassion. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with you being able to step back and look at why something's triggering you and really process it so that you can have some compassion for somebody else's story. We are always wanting compassion for our stories, and we need to have that same compassion for the other people that are in the triad. It's not a get out of jail free card for whoever hurt you. But I'm telling you, in the long run, it's going to benefit you to let go of that bitterness and see things from a different angle, a different side. So let me tell you a little bit about Cathryn Vogeley. Cathryn was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania during the post-World War II baby boom, and she earned a master's degree as a nurse specialist and treated hundreds of patients with chronic wounds. Her mission is, and always has been, healing. After leaving the medical world, she began writing and discovered a passion for the craft. Her memoir is titled, I Need to Tell You, and was published in May of 2002. Cathryn's work can be found in Grand Dame Literary Journal, 5 Minute Lit, and Readsy's weekly short story contest, for which she won first place, which does not surprise me in the least. Cathryn has raised 2 daughters with whom she enjoys close relationships. Her greatest pleasure is watching her grandchildren discover all that life has to offer. The Pacific Northwest is her home, where she lives with her husband and 3 terriers. I cannot wait for you to hear Cathryn's story. You are going to be moved. Don't miss out on the growth that could happen by listening to this podcast today. Here is Cathryn Vogeley. So welcome to the show, Cathryn. I am so glad you're here because I read your book, I Need to Tell You, and it's really the first book that I've read from a birth mother's perspective. And I read it and it really gave me so much compassion for you and other birth mothers that went through relinquishment. Just gave me a whole different outlook on it. I mean, I kind of, thought what it might be, but it really got to me. It really did. So thank you. So let's just start by telling about how you grew up, your family a little bit, and the circumstances around how you got pregnant.
I grew up in Pittsburgh I was born in 1949. I was the third in 3 years. My older sister, 18 months older than me, was colicky, and I heard about that all the time as a youngster. That Connie, her name is Connie really, but she's Corrine in the book, so I'll call her Corrine, I guess. Corrine cried night and day. And then there was my older brother, who was 3 years older than me. So our house was small. We had 1 bathroom. Eventually, there were 5 children. I had 2 come after me. My mother didn't work. My father worked as an accountant for a small family-run company. And my father was an extreme introvert. He couldn't stand noise. He couldn't stand, what he called commotion. And he has his own history of trauma, and which I didn't know. But he, looking back as a mature person, I can see that he behaved as a person who was not mentally healthy. Let's put it that way. And that is to say that as his daughter, I had no idea that what was going on had nothing to do with me. Of course, kids are egocentric. They think everything is about them.
Right.
And so he would come home at the end of the day, and I think my little brother was my younger brother is 5 years younger than me. So then there were, 4 children, 3 of them in 3 years, and then 5 years later, another one. So many mouths to feed, so much noise. And so we were always being told to shut up and stay out of the way. And so I was always getting into trouble because I didn't know what to do. I was always scared. I was always throwing up. It was a very bad situation for me.
Oh my gosh.
And then I went to Catholic school for 8 years. Very Catholic oriented. My mother took us to church every Sunday, every holy day. Confession, I think we started out at once a week, and then it was once a month, and Stations of the Cross, the whole liturgy thing. And it was pretty dramatic, of course, and I was really into it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of a counter to the drama at home. And of course, being in the situation I was as a child, nobody ever saying I love you. There were no hugs and no encouragement, so to speak. Just it was kind of the Catholic way from the opposite side, which is you're no good and you need to pray harder You need to try harder.
Yeah.
And so I did. I tried so hard, and I'm a rule follower, or I was, doing everything that I thought I was supposed to do.
Mm.
Um, my sister, Corinne, got married at 18 as soon as she graduated from high school, and she wasn't pregnant. And, it was just, I think, just a desperation to get out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't particularly like her husband. I didn't think that it was a good match or anything, but, there she was married, and she was doing what my mother had done. And, I wanted to be my mother, only I wanted to do it better.
Right.
And, so I tried to be a saint. I tried to be perfect.
Right.
It's never, always missing the mark.
I grew up Catholic too, so I get it.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us about what happened. How did you meet Gavin and that whole situation? How did the pregnancy come about?
We met at a high school dance, and, my self-esteem was so fractured. It was so weak. And, I thought I was ugly. I thought I was fat. My sister was cool. She was not fat. She was shorter than me. I always felt big. And, of course I wasn't. I mean, I was an inch taller than she was, but, most of my adult life, I thought I was big until I married my husband, and he's 6'1", and I feel very small. And now my daughters are both taller than me. So I realized somewhere along the line that I'm not big, and I'm overweight now, but I wasn't fat.
Right.
I wasn't by any means. Anyway, I think that this is something that a lot of girls and young women put on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that way, I suppose I was normal. And so I was standing along the wall with other people. It was in the gymnasium. It was at a boys' school, and the gym was dark, and the lights, were dim, and the music was loud, and we had been fast dancing, and well, they had been fast dancing. I didn't, because girls didn't dance with each other so much back then.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the slow song came on, and I thought, I can't stand standing here like some sort of a wall art. I've got to move. So I just decided to walk into the crowd. Just got from the wall. I thought, nobody's going to stop me. And I just wanted to be with the rest of the people. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be part of that group who were dancing. And so my idea was I would walk from one side of the room to the other. And then when I got to the other side, I didn't know what I was going to do. But halfway through, a boy faced me, and he asked me if I wanted to dance. And I was pretty glad about that. So I danced with him. And there was something about him. I think it was his confidence that attracted me. And so we, stayed together for the rest of the dance. And then he asked if he could drive me home. I didn't have a driver's license, so I probably went with my brother to the dance. I don't know. I can't remember that part. It's funny how much I can remember and how much I can't.
Yeah.
Some things are very, very
vivid,
sharp in my mind. Yeah. Anyway, so he drove me home and parked in front of my house, and that the first kiss was just, memorable. Let's say that. I had been kissed before, but there was just something about him.
Yeah.
He didn't try too hard. He was very calm. He made me feel special.
Yeah, that confidence you talk about really came through in the book. You could really, the way you described him, I could see exactly what you're saying now.
Yeah. And so we dated after that. He was a senior at the time, And after that year, he went away to school. He went to Notre Dame, and it was a dream of his to graduate from Notre Dame. Why, I'm not sure, but he would be the first to graduate from college in his family. His grandparents were immigrants and had Italian accents. And back then, I lived in the suburbs in a white bread neighborhood. There was nobody different from me. My parents, I can't say that they were, well, certainly not overt. They weren't overtly bigoted, but they gave me the message that people who are different are not good. You stay away from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so immigrants had a bad connotation, and somehow less than. And it's so, I think it says something about the times. It says something about my parents and their lack of worldliness.
Yeah. Their ignorance. I think a lot of people were ignorant about all that back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And now my gosh, I love people with accents. I love to hear them talk, and I love to know about where they came and so on. Anyway, so that was, right off the bat, a strike against him because he lived in a more ethnic part of the city. So we dated for a couple of years. We had a lot of fun together, a lot of dress up things, proms, and I went to Notre Dame one weekend for a game and so on and so on. So we might have had sex outside, but I think most of the time, I don't think I ever had sex with him on a bed. We were always in a car, his dad's car, and always in the front seat. I never got in the back seat. So, and I had a lot of conflict over that because I knew what I was doing was wrong, or I thought what I was doing was wrong.
Right.
I was bad. I was impure. I was a liar. And on one hand, it kind of went along with who, I was already tainted because I was a human, because that's what Catholics teach you. And my self-esteem was just so low that his attention was like everything to me.
Oh, yeah.
And he was an ambitious young man. He was smart. He was narcissistic, which I didn't know. I didn't put that together at the time. But what we were doing, and I would cry and I would say, what if I get pregnant? And I say he was narcissistic because of the way he answered that. Don't worry, everything will be all right. So everything will be all right for him is what it came down to, right?
Yes.
And so then one time we had sex in the car, and the timing was wrong because we used the rhythm method. I watched the calendar, and I would know when I couldn't have sex and withdraw. And I knew the night it happened. And I went back to the dorm, and I was just wild with fright. Yeah. And what am I going to do? And of course, when I skipped my period, I had already known. Oh my gosh. And I just I didn't know what to do. There was nobody I could tell. I was so ashamed. I was so scared. And it didn't have anything to do with the baby at that point. It had to do with what I had done. Yes. And how people would know. My mother would know. And it was just this free form anxiety. Like I couldn't, pull it down and make it manageable. Right. It was just terrifying. Right. So eventually we had to tell them and tell my parents. And
well, how did it go when you told Gavin? What was his reaction?
Oh, he was mad. So I told him on the phone, and he said, "Oh, Christ." Just that way. like very disgusted, and not disgusted with me, I don't think, but with the situation.
Yeah.
And he, of course, challenged, are you sure? And, I had seen a doctor by then, and I said, what are we going to do? And I had this fantasy in my mind that, I mean, everybody who got pregnant got married, that's back then. I had this fantasy in my mind that that's what was going to happen, that he would be not happy about it, but he would say, well, I guess this is it then.
It's just what you did.
That's what you did. And I knew he wouldn't be happy about having to either interrupt his plans or just start out life this way.
Yeah.
And so when he said, it's too much right now, I have to think about it. And so I hung up. I was in the dorm, and I hung up, and I was already scared to death. And then with his response, it added on to that. And I just didn't.
Now, what do you mean you got to think about it? We don't think about it. This is what you do.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine what was going to happen. And when he said, I have to think about it, as I was writing the book, I learned a lot through writing my book. But as I wrote that, and that's a scene I can remember pretty well, I thought, well, gosh, it really does make sense that you would, if you're the guy, that you're going to want to think about this. You can't just, and that's how he was. He was very thoughtful, and in terms of, I told you he was confident. He didn't chatter. When he said something, it had a purpose. And it makes sense to me now that he would have to think about it. However, it would have helped if he had said, don't worry, we're going to take care of this.
Yeah.
Something.
But
he left me twisting in the wind, basically. So
what happened when you told parents?
My parents, it was very scary, as you might imagine. He didn't want to tell my parents with me. He wanted me to do it on my own. And I said, oh no, we're going to do this together. And so, I finally was able to spit out the words that I'm pregnant. My father jumped up, and Gavin jumped up, and my dad was yelling, and I thought they were going to get into a fist fight. My dad was an accountant. He, little rubber band arms and a slight build. And Gavin he wasn't tall, but he was muscular. He lifted crates at his father's tavern, and he was a strapping young man. Let's put it that way. So anyway, my mother jumped up, and there was all this drama, screaming. And in my family, the only time you screamed was when my dad was mad about something I had done or my sister had done. Right. So it was all pretty bizarre. And I was shocked that my dad was mad at Gavin. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I had no idea that was coming. I thought it was all my fault. And so that was the first tough thing to get through.
And then during that meeting, your mom kind of came forward at the end and said something to him where he had to make a decision. And so tell us about that.
Yeah. She said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, get married, I suppose. And they didn't like him. So they weren't like pushing us to get married. And I think truly my mother didn't know what the hell to do. But Gavin said, I don't think I can. He said, I don't know. I don't know if I can get married right now. And she said, what are you talking about? And he said, I have to finish school. And so she yelled at him and said, there's colleges here and blah, 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 just transfer from Notre Dame. And we were in Pittsburgh, so there's several colleges. Carnegie Mellon is a good school, something to brag about if you graduate from there. And he said, I really want it to be Notre Dame. And she said, well, he said, I have to think about it. And she said, well, you just think on it. Go home and think about it and come back in 1 week and give us your decision. So she pretty much ran the whole scene.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And I'm just sitting there like a
right.
5-year-old.
Right. Oh my God. Can't imagine. So how'd it go with his parents? Or he told them already. But he
told them already.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
I don't know exactly what happened with them. He didn't give me every detail, but he said they were pissed. So his parents were, children of ethnic descent. His father was, neither of them had accents by any means, but they were a little harder around the edges, let's say, rough around the edges than my parents, who I think thought of themselves as refined. And
that's the Italian part.
Yeah.
I grew up in an Italian family, so
yeah,
I know.
There you go. Yeah, my parents are, German, Irish, very repressed, very tight-lipped, and his parents were the opposite. So his mother was a lot like Gavin. She didn't chatter. She was, I believe, very intelligent. She was very to the point. And she said, so Gavin tells us you're pregnant. I mean, she said it just like that. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what to do. Get married, I guess.
Didn't she ask you if you were sure it was him, that he was the father?
Yeah.
Oh my.
So I said, I don't know. I get married, I guess. And she said, how do you know it's his baby? And I said, she could have knocked me over with a feather. I was so flabbergasted to hear that, because I was already suffering with every time we were together. And the fact that she would suggest that was just beyond my comprehension. I can see it now, but I sure couldn't see it back then. So that was pretty humiliating.
Right.
And I said, how forcefully can you say, I've never been with anybody else? And then his dad was all nervous, and he was standing up and he was walking back and forth, and he just spun around and he kind of boomed, and he said, what the hell do you want to marry him for? Why, the only thing that kid can do is get a hard on. I'll never forget him.
Wow.
I just wanted to die. So I guess the bottom line is, on both sides, it was very dramatic.
Yeah.
And his mother then said, have you thought about abortion? And abortion back then was not a word that was spoken. You just didn't. It was like in my house, you don't say that word.
Especially Catholic.
It was a bad word.
Yes.
And not only, to say it, but to suggest it to me.
Right.
Little me, to go into some, here's how I pictured it, a dark alley near some trash bins.
Yeah.
Where somebody would use maybe a flashlight in the middle of the night, and it would be raining. I had this whole horrible scene in
thunder and lightning and everything.
Yeah. And somebody would cut with a dirty knife, cut into me.
Yeah.
That's the idea that I had in my head about abortion.
Yeah. Well, not to mention growing up Catholic, that's a one-way ticket to hell. So.
Oh, sure. Well, I already knew I was going to hell because I had sex and I wasn't supposed to. But yeah, abortion would be, it was just so foreign to me on so many levels. And I think now looking back, it shows her lack of sensitivity to this young girl I mean, really nobody, was with me
Yeah. Yeah.
in any way. My
There
parents,
was
his
no
parents,
sympathy, no support,
there was no compassion, no
nothing.
support, nobody saying, I love you.
It'll
And
be
the
okay,
fact that
nothing.
this
Yeah.
has happened doesn't mean any less of you, you know. No, I was just thoroughly humiliated and shamed.
Yeah.
And of course, being Catholic, I knew I deserved it.
Mm,
That was no good. I shouldn't have done what I did. Um,
yeah.
so now here I am. I'm pregnant and not married. I didn't know anybody that got pregnant and didn't get married. And so, what am I going to do?
Yeah. So it seemed like Gavin was distancing himself from you and the whole situation, as soon as it happened. So what was going through your head at that point when he decided to finish school?
I had to switch tracks. That's how I felt. Like I had this life with him in school, is in nursing school. So the life that I had, and as a young person, I didn't have much in the way of planning skills. I mean, if you had said, what are you going to do when you get out of nursing school? I probably would have said, I don't know, get a job. But I didn't have any aspirations like, oh, I want to work at Cleveland Clinic or, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I knew that I had to do something, right? And having an abortion or seeking an abortion was never part of it. I knew I couldn't keep the baby. I knew that I had to have the baby and I had to give the baby up.
So was it because you knew you weren't going to have any help doing it? Was that why? Or you just figured, how am I going to take care of this baby myself? And
there was never any discussion on my parents' part about alternatives. There was absolutely no discussion about, well, maybe, my sister Corinne was married. There was never a suggestion that maybe she could take the baby. And she didn't know. She didn't know I was pregnant. That. She had no children.
Yeah.
And now, I look back on it and I think, well, that's a potential situation or solution.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't
So that was a possibility. I could have gone to my grandparents in Fort Lauderdale and stayed there and had some time to think about ways to manage this situation. But there was so much shame and it was
and secrecy too.
And I wasn't unusual in that. I mean, yeah. So I knew I had to do something. And my mother made an appointment with my cousin who is a priest. And so we went to, and I was mad at her because I didn't want anybody to know. And here she had told my cousin. And so we sat together and it was very, very uncomfortable. And he said, his name is Father Ed, and he said, so I understand that, I think he made me say it. I think he said, I understand that you want to talk about something.
Mm.
And I said, well, because I didn't know how much my mother had told him. So I told him, and, it was every minute of my life at that time was humiliating. So right. It was just one more humiliation. And my parents sat there still and as quiet as could be. And he said, do you want to keep the baby? And he's the first and only one that ever said that. Mm. And it just was like, what? And I said, I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any place to stay. My parents didn't like children. My parents never suggested any such solution. although Gavin's mother, I have to say, she did say, what if you have the baby and then after Gavin graduates from college, you get married? How about that?
Uh-huh.
She did say that. And I, because I never knew of anybody who did that. I wasn't having a
Right.
baby
You didn't do
without a
it. Yeah.
husband. You just didn't do that. So I said no to her. I said, no, that won't work. So anyway, I found, and I don't remember exactly how this came about, but I found my chemistry teacher that I used to babysit for. I found that she had moved out of state. And I got her number and called her and asked if, told her my situation and asked if I could stay with her for a few months or 6 weeks. And she said, okay. So I went out there and stayed for 6 weeks. And Rosalia was the home for unwed mothers, and you couldn't go into Rosalia until you were 7 months. So I hid out in Ohio, and she had gone from being a chemistry teacher to a guidance counselor. So she didn't humiliate me, but she also didn't give me any therapy either. So it was to her advantage to have me there because, I was there she was single. So I was there when she was gone, which she was all the time. I was there with her kids. And so November 1st finally came around and I went to the home for unwed mothers to Rosalia, which was, it was a lot like my dorm, my nursing dorm. There were 2 girls to a room. It was Catholic, so there were icons and candles and things like that around. There was a chapel. They had mass. And they had activities for us to do. And I know some people have very bad stories about their experience in a home, but I don't. And I don't have any bad experiences from my Catholic school either. And other people, I saw them get slapped around, but I was so good that nobody ever had to do anything to me. So, so I had, my due date was January 3rd, and the 3rd came and went, as did all the other girls that entered when I entered and after. And 3 weeks went by before I had finally went into labor.
Did they not induce at that time? They didn't.
I guess they could have, but
that was
they
crazy.
didn't.
3 weeks passed. Did you, when you were pregnant, in the book, you said, at one point, you said, my belly's roundness had grown and the baby lay still while I rubbed my palm gently over it, thinking how the baby moved very little at night and the 2 of us sleeping together. Did you allow yourself to connect to the baby at all during pregnancy, or did you try not to?
I tried not to
do that.
I really tried not to. Do you have children yourself?
I do. I have 2.
So, and it was my first pregnancy. So it was all new to me. Like the quickening, I didn't know what was happening. And, feeling a poke through your belly, that elbow or whatever. But I was in Rosalia, girls talked all the time about not getting attached to your baby. And
is that something that Rosalia kind of told you guys?
No,
it's best for you, or just?
It was, it's interesting when I think of the notions that I had. I have the feeling that they came from the other girls, but I don't remember anything about the people in charge. I don't remember that anybody gave us classes or counseling or anything like that. I know that I spent a lot of time in my room crying.
And crying because you were lonely and
I was lonely. I was bad. It was mostly because I was bad. I had this was like the worst. It was the worst possible thing for me.
Right.
that I was making a baby that I wasn't going to keep, and how awful for that baby to not have its mother. It was awful. And who wouldn't cry about that? It was awful.
Right.
And in order to deal with myself, you have to keep going. You don't have a choice. It's just the way it is. You don't have a choice. You have to keep going. And
well, at one point you also said and when you were at Roselia, you said that you felt desolate and despondent, and you said everything about me felt wrong.
Exactly.
Exactly. What, I mean, I can't imagine. Everything about you felt wrong.
Everything was wrong for a long time. Not just then, for a long time. Once Gavin left my life.
Yeah.
Because he was the buoy for me. He was the one thing that kept me up out of the drowning water.
Right. Well, he could have changed, the whole scenario by just.
For me.
Yeah.
For me. But how would it have been for him?
Right.
And how would it have been for our baby?
Yep. Yep.
And I know when I think about that and what the circumstances might have, we were both immature. How would I didn't have healthy people around me. How would I have developed?
Right.
You're not developed at 18 years old.
Oh.
And at that time, people thought you were.
Yeah.
At 18, you're an adult,
Mm-hmm.
and, so a lot was expected of me.
Yeah.
And I had let myself down in the whole world. Everything about me was wrong.
I can't imagine. So it's your due date. You went past your due date, 3 weeks. So tell us about the birth and then what happened afterwards.
Can I tell you about the running part? I love that story. I just love that story. It's the one bright spot for me in that time in Roselia. That day so there was another girl that was overdue, and I just was absolutely desperate. Everybody kept going, and I wasn't going, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I just, would sit there and look out the window, and there was this long sidewalk out the back, and beyond there was a big grassy area, and beyond that there was a parking lot, but it was way far away. And it was January, of course. It was cold and snowy, and so I at that point I would do anything to have labor. I wanted to be done. So I asked Rosie if she ever thought about jogging. And she said, what are you talking about? But we were both overdue. And I said, maybe if we jog, it'll start the contractions. And so I had to kind of talk her into it. She said, oh, okay. So she was 17, which seemed a lot younger than me. I was 18.
You were an adult. She was still a child.
I was an adult. So we go out, and, here I am, overdue. And I said, okay, let's go. And all of a sudden, it just seemed absolutely impossible that I would be able to run down that sidewalk. And she said, well, you go first. So we went back and forth that way. And I started running, and I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. And so she started running, and she made it all the way down and back. And I think I went halfway down and back. And I said, I can't do it. So she went the next day.
Yeah.
And I went like 3 days later or something.
Oh, okay.
They wouldn't do a C-section on a Roselia girl.
Oh, why?
Because
the scar, right?
It would leave. This is what they told me. It would leave a scar.
Yeah.
And it was important that you tell the world that I don't know if you're supposed to say you're a virgin or not, but that you hide this experience. The world does not.
So this Catholic home is telling you to lie.
Well, to hide, hide that,
yeah.
hide it. And for that reason, they wouldn't do a C-section, but it's I think they put me and the baby at
Oh,
risk by
definitely.
having me wait that long. 40
Definitely.
hours
Well, and the one
is
nurse,
too
when she
long.
listened to the heart rate and she said it was going down with contractions, I mean, right there, that's,
Yeah.
that's an
Yeah.
emergency
Yeah.
nowadays. That's an emergency right then. So they let you stay in
Yeah.
labor for 48 hours.
Yeah. And then finally, and they kept checking me, and baby's not down, she's not crowning, blah, blah, blah.
And
So
nobody was there with you during
no,
the labor. Your mom
no,
didn't come. Nobody came.
mm-mm,
Wow.
no. I was in a room by myself because I was a Rosalia girl, and the staff was limited for, how many people were allowed in and out of the room, because the more people that came in the room, somebody might recognize me. So
Mm.
there was one nurse named Lynn, and she was there for 2 nights. I mean, I was there for 2 nights. And the first night, she came in and checked my vitals and checked the baby and everything. And she was very kind to me. And the second night, when she came in, she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're still here.
Mm.
Isn't there anybody, and you're alone, isn't there anybody I can call for you?"
Uh,
And I said, "No." And she started crying, and she said, "I would sit with you myself if I didn't have to work."
mm. So
And
did anyone notify Gavin, your parents, that you were even in labor, or did they know?
apparently Rosalia notified my parents, because my mother knew that I was in labor. I didn't call her. We didn't interact while I was at Rosalia.
Mm.
Um, they were 20 minutes away.
Wow.
And, I went through Thanksgiving and Christmas at Rosalia.
Wow.
A lot of girls went out for the holidays, but I stayed.
Wow. So what happened after you had her and you left the hospital? Tell about that story.
So the girls at Rosalia, the constant mantra was, don't hold your baby. If you hold your baby, you're not going to be able to give her up. Certainly don't feed your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, they said, if you see your baby, that'll be it. As if it was some magic thing.
Right.
And so this was kind of drummed into me, not by the staff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly sure it was not by the staff. But to me, it was kind of the rule. It was the technique.
Yeah.
And there was one girl who did keep her baby, and she nursed her baby. And I remember saying, "What the hell? Why would you go through all this and keep your baby?" But it was an example to me of how important it was not to see your baby.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are hormones, chemical signals in our bodies that you can't wish them away. They're there.
Yeah.
Your body functions that way, just the same as you breathe in and out. You can't wish your breath
Mm-hmm.
away, and you can't wish these hormones away. And the hormones function is to make the mother and the baby want each other.
Yeah.
To bond.
Right.
So the day I was leaving, I was in this old rickety wheelchair, and they took me through the kitchen, the hospital's kitchen, instead of out the main entrance where everybody else went.
Oh my God.
And, so I'm going through the kitchen, and the kitchen staff is, looking sideways at me, and they take me out the back entrance where the deliveries were made and where the trash bins are. And there's a taxi pulls up, and
the way you're describing it is almost the way you were describing the abortion that you were imagining in the alley. Wow. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was still where I deserved to be.
I guess. Oh my gosh.
So I got in the cab, and I was extremely painful. I'm sure I had significant birth injuries, even though nobody addressed that.
Right.
I'm certain I should have had a section. The baby was 9.5 pounds, and
yes,
knowing what I know about obstetrics, my guess is everything was very dry because she was so overdue. And so there was probably some difficulty, with the delivery.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I get in the cab and I go to close the door, and I hear this person screaming to wait, and I look up, and here's a nurse coming at me from the back door, and she's running, and she's got a bundle in her arms, and she's screaming, "Wait, you can't leave yet. You have to take your baby." And I was like, what? No way. And so I'm, putting my hands up. No, I can't. And she stopped and she said, "What's the matter with you? Why can't you take your baby?" And I said, "They said never to hold your baby." And she said, "Who said that?" And I said, "Over at Rosalia, everybody said that." And she said, "Look, this is the way we do it. How's the baby supposed to get back to Rosalia?" And I said, "I don't know. Can you bring her?" And she said, "No, look, this is the way we always do it. Let's get this baby out of this cold."
Yeah.
And so she put the baby in my arms, and she closed the door, and she ran back inside. So there we were.
Wow.
My few minutes with my baby.
My few minutes with my baby. And those were really the only moments that she's had in person with her baby. She had no idea that they were going to put that baby in the car with her to take back to Rosalia. She didn't know. All she knew was, I'm not supposed to hold my baby. I'm not supposed to see my baby. That was drilled into her by all the new mothers at Rosalia. And here she was, confronted with her baby in that moment. And what do? Do you look at that baby? And what's that going to do to you? It's just heartbreaking. And how she was treated and shamed, and everyone else got to go on with their lives. And she had to go through that by herself. She went through the holidays by herself. Just heartbreaking. Just heartbreaking. So there is a part 2 to the story. So stay tuned next week for that, and you will find out exactly what Cathryn did when she was holding her baby in that car, in the taxi, on the way back to Rosalia. These women are out there, and there are a lot of them. If you know of a birth mother that might need to hear this story, please share it with them. Tell them about Cathryn's book, I Need to Tell You. Because just like adoptees, birth mothers need to know that they are not alone in what they are feeling. I'm not only trying to educate the world, but I'm trying to pull together the adoption constellation and have us come together to tell our stories, to educate the world, but also for us to know that we're not alone. If you have been touched by Cathryn's story or any of the stories that are on this podcast, please consider subscribing. You will get notified of the new podcasts that are coming out. It's totally free. You can also rate and review the podcast on Spotify and Apple if those are your listening platforms, and I would be very appreciative if you did that. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Just search Mind Your Own Karma. As always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.